Great. So, good morning, afternoon, evening, I guess, depending on where everyone is joining from today. My name is Ella. I'm the Journal Manager of Frontiers in Research Metrics and Analytics, with the journal hosting the collection we'll be talking about today. And I'd like to welcome you all to today's meeting. And this is a webinar, as you are aware, dedicated to the ongoing collection or research topic around Sciducio, a practical framework for guiding the development and leadership of the academic research environment. So as you may have seen from my email, we plan to spend the first part of the session with kind of a talk led by Lee and Lane, who are topic editors for the research topic. And then it'll be followed by a more interactive phase. So I'm really looking forward to hearing this interesting talk and kind of having this interactive session. So I will now pass over to you, Lee and Lane. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thanks for setting this up. This was great of you to do that, very professional. So I'm Lee. Lane will jump on in a moment. This work, Sciducio, started off when I first moved to the US from New Zealand. So we were just chatting. I'm from England originally, but getting my lab running here, the cardiometabolic lab at Research One University, and all the stresses that come along with that. And along the way, I built a big team, a well-funded team, and I sought help to manage the various activities that are involved with research and academia in general. And this included a consultancy company, but also professors in entrepreneurship, including Lang, who I've actually known since New Zealand. We've known for a long time, and this is good because our worlds collide. And he was able to label and help make more nuanced and tangible some of the ideas that I had and the things that I was struggling with. So with that, I am going to move you to Lane to start the actual talk.
Excellent. It's good to see everyone here today. And I have one of my former colleagues and friends from the University of Central Oklahoma. I guess when we were students, we wouldn't be colleagues, but once student, once friends, always colleagues. Ryan Allen, Professor Allen is here. That's awesome. Yeah, so Lee gave a little bit of backdrop to how our paths crossed from Christchurch, New Zealand, where we are both there affiliated with different institutions while our time was being navigated in New Zealand. And we've continued to stay in touch with each other and do research. And we're touching base on this new issue. You know, a lot of times really new creative ideas come out of the form of a problem. And so Lee was facing a problem with trying to figure out ways to manage large teams. And, you know, when you're applying for large grants, it's going to help provide funding, but really that sort of strategy, leadership, management, and planning stages that you're in when you're really trying to pave the way or sort of envision or chart the course for what you're trying to do. So in academia, we wear a lot of hats. No one is ever just doing one thing. I call it gear shifting. And a lot of times in the middle of the day, you're going to shift gears. One minute you might have a group of students in the office who are asking questions and you're talking to them. Next minute you're in a meeting with peer faculty members and you're redeveloping new curriculum. Then the next minute you're in a lab with a handful of graduate assistants trying to do some new experiment or something like that. And so you're really moving into a lot of different directions. And then when you add in the community, which a lot of folks are moving into working in the community as well, you really add a lot of different dynamics. And there's a lot of responsibilities within the professional context, not to mention the personal identities we all carry with us back at home with our respective families and partners and things like that. And so we realized we were wearing a lot of hats, and they don't teach about hat shopping through PhD processes. Typically, you become an expert in the topic that you're studying, which is the purpose. But then when you are trying to take that knowledge and apply it to creating solutions or identifying ways of addressing wicked complex problems, sometimes you just don't have all of the tools that you need maybe to be successful. And so when Lee and I put our heads together, we realized there's some ideas that we could maybe codify in a new and creative way. So also within the industry, you're learning important lessons, but it also requires training. And again, all we know at the end of the day is that a degree is essentially a responsibility to continue to learn, right? You're never done with that of which you've studied. Even once you finish a highest level of a degree, like a terminal degree in the form of a doctorate, that's just a higher level invitation to continue to learn. And so one of the steps in this process was to try and do that. And so we created Sciducio, which is essentially serving as a one-stop shop tool for starting to manage and think through the vision you have for a larger project within the context of labs, but also an area that we're looking into is looking at social venture startups that are being born within the university environment as well. So Lee, let's punch to the next slide. I'll speed it up here. So here's our roadmap for kind of the next 35 minutes. We're going to try to keep us on track here. We're going to be moving quick. 2 slides per minute is our goal. So don't be alarmed by the volume of slides. We're going to keep cruising. So we'll start with the intro and keep going on. So Lee, let's get that next slide. Okay, so you might be wondering about the term. We really need to put this in front of you all really quickly. This is rooted in Latin across 3 different elements of terms. Scientia, which stands in context of science, ducat, which is lead, and then educo, which is develop. And so we're really trying to integrate these 3 concepts within the context of lab sciences. And this is where Lee's expertise really comes in and how this tool can be applied within laboratory environments when you're building teams. And then where I sort of come in on this is my background in management, entrepreneurship, and leadership, and these different tools that are out there for helping startups develop their ventures. And I was telling Lee about some of these tools that I just know about off the back of my hand, like business model canvas or a lean canvas model or persona canvas or things like this, or a customer interview framework, and just the things that we have. He's like, you guys have tools for like managing all those processes? He's like, those sound like a lot like the processes I'm managing on the teams when I'm building these large scale $1 million grant projects. And I'm like, well, does this help you? And so we had these conversations, and he was saying that he was being helped quite a bit. And so we thought about what happens if you put all these together and maybe formulate it into a framework that helps you organize those hats. And don't worry, there's a picture of organized hats coming up later, so don't hold your breath. So the audience for this are newly minted academics, people coming into the field who are looking to build teams, existing academics who might be moving to new institutions and building those labs from the ground up. I know Lee's done that a couple of times in his career, having to move not only from one institution to the next, but also globally into new environments. And so trying to realize that when you fail to plan, you're essentially planning to fail, right? Eisenhower said that the plan is nothing, but planning is everything. And so this tool is inherently designed to get people to stop and think and plan for what they think is going to transpire through the pursuit of their problem statement, is really what we're going to get to in a second. So here's kind of an overview of the framework. We're going to really reverse engineer this. We wanted to tease you with what this sort of framework looks like right now that we've developed. And we're going to go through each of these elements here. And so it kind of starts at the top level, the domain of plan across these 3 primary blocks around the value or the problem you're trying to solve and for whom, the strategy you're going to use to approach that. Think mission, vision, objectives, and then SMART goals or KPIs, and then boom, into leadership. What's the culture? What's the sort of spirit that exists within your team that you're trying to create, right? We want to get people to start thinking about these things early. And then the domain of management, working through there, the things you need to do. This is how you're going to accomplish it. And then what is it that you're accomplishing? The end is the deliverable or the product or the solution or the service or the offering. But we like the term deliverable because we think it captures the essence of a lot of different fields. So we'll keep cruising. And so these are those 3 components, again, sort of extrapolated back out of the framework there. First of all, taking a pause to plan and set a course and envision what success looks like. This is the why and the who. This is the background and the objectives you're trying to pursue and achieve through the grant or through the project or through the team that you're building. Management includes your activities, key resources, and finances, which is how you're going to accomplish it. And then your deliverable represents the what and where. What is it that you're creating and where are you going to distribute that information? Is it a journal article or is it something more or something different? And we're going to work you through each of these with examples and further development. Finally, this is a signpost. We have a website that exists with a lot of these resources on it for you all. It can be found here at this website, Sciducio. .thecml.net. You all can find that. This is available afterwards, and we can put all of these links into the chat as well. And then we are also in a position right now where our ultimate goal from our time together is to, we really want to solicit contributions from other people in academia and even in industry who might want to push on this a little bit and problematize this a little bit more. These can be made in many capacities. We are looking for people to suggest edits, maybe blocks that are missing, blind spots that the framework has. The goal is that this is not meant to be prescriptive for people to take and it's going to be the panacea to all your planning problems. This is just meant to be a descriptive process using existing extant literature to inform our thinking on this. And so we really are putting this out there as a preliminary piece to get punched. It's a punching bag more than anything. And then hopefully through a few cycles of that, we can then have it improved and then scale it for additional use. So I just wanted to make sure that that point was clear. Here's an example of how it works. We have a Jamboard that's available from that site that we mentioned earlier that you can tuck into. And here's kind of what it might look like. So Lee, let's jump to the next slide real quick. And so here's how you might develop it. We will come back to this slide after we talk through these 3 layers a little bit more in detail. And this is where you're going to hear from Lee, me, and then Lee again. So it's just not going to be me talking to you for 35 minutes. We're going to hand the reins over to Lee here in a second. But really where I wanted to leave it at this point is just to let you see kind of how we envision people using it. So typically business model canvases like this, which is what this is born from, this thinking has been informed by that. And the lean business model canvas, we have a book that's coming out in August of this month. We're in the last stages of it right now. And there's this amazing piece that's coming in it that's looking at social enterprise canvas model, right? So specifically a canvas model that's built around social businesses or social entrepreneurial ventures by a guy named Sergio Sparvero, who's in Italy. And he's an awesome professor. And he's got this amazing new framework that's coming out as well. And so there's a lot of people trying to think about how you can, people are trying to think about how you can think about planning better. Because again, if you're not, if you're failing to plan, you're planning to fail. And that's a real point we want to push on here. So I'm going to hand the reins over to Lee here when we move into this crazy photo, just to keep everybody guessing. Lee, what do you got going on?
Yeah, the picture, this is a cassowary bird. It has nothing to do with the talk. I just think it's an amazing bird. I do use it just to break things up and to reset people's brains a bit, but it is an amazing bird. It's the world's big, heaviest bird, and they are endangered, and unfortunately you find him in northeast Queensland and Papua New Guinea. So now we're going to move on to the plan section. So as Lane alluded to, in academia we wear many hats. There are many tasks that we have to accomplish. But while we're receiving our training, while we're completing our PhDs, we don't get trained to wear all of these hats. We tend to get trained just to do our little piece of research, and at the time we think it's the most important thing in the world because we're fully immersed in it. But when you get into your first academic job, that's just a tiny little piece of what your roles and responsibilities are. So with Sciducio, then, as Lane said, when you get to that new lab, how can you go about streamlining some of these processes and putting a plan in place to help to increase your likelihood of success? You can't guarantee success, but we can increase the likelihood. And this is where the Sciducio comes in. And we work through all of these steps from the beginning through to the deliverables. But the first domain that we're going to cover now is the planning domain. So again, I should mention the plan domain includes value, strategy, and leadership. So starting with this then, value, we need to think about the problem, like as a research group. And this could be social science, basic science, applied science, any area of academia, or as Lane said, entrepreneurial but as a group, what is it we're trying to accomplish? Why are we here? What is our purpose? Who are we trying to accomplish it for? And this last one, unfair advantage, I think is a major one. What makes you different? What makes you stand out? Don't compete against someone or some group that can do something better than you. Do something that you can do that no one else can do quite so well. So it's really important that you find that unfair advantage. Then we come to the strategy section. So when you're starting up your group, or maybe you are mid-career and you're trying to just bring things together and strategize moving forward. But some things that you want to think about during this planning stage is your mission statement. Like, your mission statement is, what is the group trying to accomplish? What are the functions of the group? The vision statement is, if we do accomplish these things, what does that look like? Like, what do we imagine that to look like? Then we have a value statement, and this will play into leadership. These are the values that bond the group together, the values of the organization as a whole. Then we can move down into objectives. So the objectives are, well, how are we going to accomplish those things that we set out in our mission and vision statement? We then identify projects to tackle those objectives. And this is something that we do very poorly in academia, but of course you'd never see groups in industry go without establishing the KPIs, or the key performance indicators. But what are the metrics for success? How do you know if you're succeeding or not? And these KPIs are a lot more fluid and cover multiple domains. So it's not just how many pubs did you get, or did you get your funding. This could be many things depending on the activities happening within your group. And then Lane's favorite area, leadership. Like, if you're going to start to build up a group, like, you've established a mission statement, you've got a vision in terms of what it would be like if you achieve that mission. But to do this, you need good leadership. So things that we need to think about are the kind of mindset you're trying to foster within your group. And Lane will go over this more, I think, but one good model is your entrepreneurial mindset, to ensure that the group functions optimally. How do we consider each individual? How do we ensure that each individual is making a unique contribution and feels valued, and you're making good use of their skill set? Along with that, what tools are we going to use for inspirational motivation, so that people are inspired to come to work and do things? And this part is a major hidden aspect of what we do in academia. But there's a decision-making environment, there's an underlying culture within the department and the larger organization, and no one gives you a handbook in terms of how to wade through this. But if you're not situating yourself appropriately within that culture, you may be trying to make decisions or do things that go against the grain, and your life would be more difficult than it needs to be. But how do you go about identifying these things? The first step, of course, is awareness. So let's go over some specific examples. We can't go over everything because we don't have time. I'm just going to give some specific examples, and then we want to leave time for discussion at the end. So again, this first domain, we're talking about the plan domain, and the blocks within that domain, we're talking about value, strategy, and leadership. Now, if we think about this, and this is for each of these domains, this plan is going to help us see the big picture, right, of what we're trying to do. Many of you would have heard the expression, seeing the forest for the trees. right? We shouldn't focus on those individual trees. We should be seeing how the whole ecosystem works. So this plan helps us see the big picture. It doesn't help us accomplish that. We need tools to try and achieve these things that we are planning. And we're going to go through a couple of examples now. Again, just linking back to the website that Lane mentioned earlier on, our Sciducio website, you will see there are some links for some useful tools that may help you if you decide to use this Sciducio canvas to help you navigate academia. This is the slide we saw before, so the strategy slide. And I want to give an example in terms of the mission statement, setting the functions of the group. So here's one that I set for my group, and the mission is to ensure the growth and personal development of folks in my lab. And I say I've had up to 70 people in the lab at one time, from postdoc through down to undergraduate and high school, and each of those requires a different kind of mentorship, and they're at different stages of their career trajectory, but we need ways to train those, and that is one of typically our major deliverables within academia. So we're talking about grants and papers and all this other stuff, but we can't forget we are there to train the next generation. That to me is the most important deliverable. We like to consider diversity, equity, and inclusivity in everything we do. And then research-wise, our goal is to conduct science to improve population health span. And again, this is on our website. It's laid out, so everyone knows what the mission of the lab is. What about some things we can do on the leadership block to improve inspirational motivation? One strategy that we've used is creating a brand identity. So, folks aren't part of the Stoner group or what have you. They are part of the cardiometabolic lab, or Americans like to abbreviate everything. It became the CML when people kept talking about the CML. So this happened organically, but now I realize how effective the branding exercise is, and getting people to work towards that brand rather than an individual. I realize it's such a powerful tool, and now help others do this, like create their own brand identity, including logos, etc. And we all like this. We all like being part of something bigger than ourselves, right? And this is one way to achieve that. We also use a RACI, which stands for Responsible, Actionable, Consulted, and Informed. So we've got the various roles in our group outlined with short descriptions, and you'll see the color coding in there, but where we're listing who's accountable, which normally be the head of the group, but responsible is the person who actually carries out the activities. So everyone knows what their functions are within the group. Going on to the next thing, this is another now I'm putting this up here because I as well as an Englishman and an American, I am a Kiwi. I lived in New Zealand 10 years and became a citizen, and New Zealand did have a better bird than Australia. This is the giant moa that I think stood about 3 meters, 12 feet tall, but got hunted to extinction, unfortunately, when the Maori got there about 900 years ago. But the main point is New Zealand is better than Australia. So that's all you need to.
We're full of information. We're learning all sorts of great stuff. I'm one quick case point I want to make in transition here is there was a book chapter I was working on recently with a colleague from Chapel Hill. Her name's Professor Alice Ammerman, and she is a really interesting nutrition and dietetics professor. And we were doing a chapter looking at this social venture that she created, and it's under a larger conglomerate that they've developed over time, right? These ideas start with just a small seed, and then you take care of it, and over time it grows into a mighty oak, perhaps. But this was called Equity Foods, and they started a project called Good Bowls. And Good Bowls is essentially, they work with local farmers to create Med-South diet-based bowls that are frozen, but they use seconds from the farmers. And seconds is a term within the produce context of those things that might have blemishes on them that they can't sell at Ingles or at Walmart or at your local grocery store, because the farmers can't sell them to the grocery stores because they won't buy them because there's a small blemish or something like on a tomato. And so they work with these farmers to mitigate food waste and integrate this into the food bowl. And then they also have these dietitianed to like the nth degree through science to make them like the healthiest pound for pound bowl when it comes to non-communicable diseases that we have in our society and population, which Lee is also an expert in that area as well. And so Professor Ammerman developed this, and I remember talking to her about this process when I was helping her as the editor of the book to work through her chapter and to make sure she was getting it crafted correctly. I'm like, oh my goodness, this concept of Sciducio, it sounds like the framework didn't exist when they were working on it, right? These things are sort of happening simultaneously, but I saw so many of the potential pitfalls, which she codified as like, we went left and we should have went right, or we should have gone straight or up or down. A lot of those things could have potentially been considered with a bit of pre-planning, right? If you had a framework to consider a lot of the moving parts of what she was getting ready to navigate. It was a small initiative built within the institution, grant funded externally through large level NSF grants and NIH grants and things like this. And then they've now been able to venture off into its own standing LLC, and it's able to go and produce, and it's in supermarkets around North Carolina. And it's kind of a really cool story in case, but I just saw some of those nascent stages of development for that particular project. It was born inside of a higher education institution. It was born in a lab trying to figure out ways to make healthier meal alternatives to people with non-communicable diseases that need to have a different diet than other people to make sure that they maintain their health. And I just saw the relevance in that. So that's a quick pit stop there. Let's jump into the manage here, and I'm going to keep cruising. So now we're looking into the manage domain, which you've got the plan, you've got the big vision. At some point, you've got to turnkey this into how are we going to actually do this? What are the activities we need to do? What are the key resources we need access to? And what are our finances looking like in the form of revenues, the money coming in, and then the inevitable cash flow, that money going out that's going to keep this operation alive because it's hungry a lot of times for resources. So let's keep cruising here, Lee. Great. So our activities here under manage are broken down into sub areas. And these sub areas are focused on research, professional development, environment, administrative, and time. And so these are all of the things you need to consider, right? What's the resources that you need as a base understanding within your project? Remember, this is all rooted back to that problem that was in the first box that you start to talk about. Within the business model canvas, which was developed by Austrian professor Austin Walder about 15 years ago, and it's fundamentally revolutionized places like, maybe you've heard of like Y Combinator. Y Combinator is an incubator system that's supported by Facebook, and they use a lot of funding to support a lot of new ventures there. If you get into Y Combinator, it's like the next level of these sort of incubators. They're using business model canvases all the time to try to get people to iterate and improve upon their business idea in a really quick iterative way versus going and writing a 50-page business plan and then coming back and being like, well, do you like it? Right? That takes a lot of time. Business model canvases are very nimble, and that's how this has been designed as well. And so when you're putting this sort of basic research into place, you're trying to get a basic understanding of what you need in order to be successful in the context of the management phase. And so that's the research aspect of activity. Professional development, we'll dig into this a little bit more deeply with a practical example. But what does your team need, right? Just because you brought the right people together doesn't mean that they're right now. You brought them together because they're going to be right once the team gels. And so what sort of professional development opportunities do you need to start creating as the manager and the leader, right? That leader is casting that innovation, that vision they have for the future of what success looks like when you get there to the top of the mountain or the bottom of the valley. It's that vision. Okay, someone's got to manage the logistics to get you. And that's where we are right now. So what sort of skill sets do you need to have through professional development on your team? What environment are you trying to create in that space? What processes are you putting into place to be able to move people through this? Administratively, what does your hierarchy or even a heterarchy look like? Where does that responsibility reside? And I think the Raki tool that Lee mentioned earlier is a really great one. So you can see whose responsibility each aspect of a larger project is at any point in time. Administratively, who is responsible for different administrative aspects of the project? And then ultimately, the most precious commodity, the truly only non-renewable resource we have in our lives is our own time. We'll never get it back. I hope you all are investing the last 31 minutes of your life wisely. But so time is another aspect of it. And so these are the things that you're needing to be thinking about. And that doesn't mean you have to become paralyzed by thinking about these things. It just means you need to give each of them at least a gentle nod to let them know, I'm thinking about you. You're not relevant yet, but you might be soon, right? So this is how planning works. You're sort of thinking about all these strategies. Lee, let's keep cruising. I'll speed it up.
Lane, I just wanted to emphasize, we're mentioning project and project management, etc. But that's not a singular. I mean, we're talking about the global mission of the lab, of why you're there, what you're trying to accomplish, how you're trying to impact your field, and that will require many individual projects, etc. But ultimately, there's something you're trying to achieve, and this is dynamic, right? The mission is never going to be over. The vision is never going to be totally achieved. It's dynamic. And that will continue to evolve as your group evolves.
Great. So moving to the next level are those key resources that you need. And this is actually very similar to one of the elements, the 9 elements of the business model canvas from Austin Walder, which is a key resource. And he sort of addresses a lot of those things that you're going to need to be able to accomplish the vision that you've charted for yourself in the planning phase. And so this includes infrastructure. What infrastructure and resources do you need in order to execute this? The equipment, right? Some labs will need different equipment in order to execute. The people, the expertise, sometimes you have to find the best person that's out there in addition to then professionally developing those in addition to that person. But you've got to build your lab a lot of times around key experts. And then the partner networks that exist as well. These are all sources for key resources. We're not saying they're the only ones you need to consider, but these are critical ones that need to be considered. We'll give examples here in a minute. Let's keep cruising, Lee. And then finally, finances, because resources, I've seen, it's amazing in the startup world, the number of startups that have an excessive burn rate that are still household names in our life, but have never turned an actual profit quarter to quarter. It's absolutely unbelievable. And so we know that finances are a critical element of any operation. And we know that when it comes to any business, the number one expense for any business, it really doesn't matter what industry they're in. You could probably find one example to prove me wrong. If you want to do that later, I'm happy for you to do that. It is people. Every business, no matter what they're producing, whether it's a sandwich with chicken on it, or it's a vegetarian option, or it's new cutting edge technology, or it is some revolutionary concept being born out of a lab. At the end of the day, the common denominator across every one of those innovations are people. And it is the number one expense for any operation. And so this is getting you to stop and think about some of those elements of finances, fixed costs, the variable costs associated with your project, and then potential revenue streams where you can have that money coming in to make sure that you're able to breathe lifeblood into your project. So these are the things to consider. We'll give an example here in a second. Lee, let's move to these examples and then we'll get you back on to deliver. Great. So we'll start with professional development. And professional development here, working with your team, it's important, like I mentioned earlier, to have that team together, but start to pour into them and to develop them. And so some tools here, I've just thrown a few out here onto the screen that you all can adopt or use or ask more questions about later, is individual development plans are really thorough. They're very intensive. and they're excellent resources to use. Some more entry-level ones, you might not necessarily want to start to an IDP initially. Sometimes it's nice to loosen people up a little bit and get them thinking. And one of the best ways that I've ever been able to do this within the teams I've ran, 5, 6, 7 people working in a center towards a project or a larger mission. I mean, I used to be an executive director of a center for community engagement and service learning, and we engaged with over 100 partners around the region that we were serving in Western North Carolina. Thousands of students. We had a lot of moving parts, but I always wanted my staff to know that we are a team. And so we would use the 5 languages of appreciation, and we would use strengths finders in order to start to create a synergy. Because what happens when you adopt these sorts of things, it creates a common language within your team, and people will be like, oh, what's your language of appreciation? Or like, oh, what's your top 5 strengths? And it just starts to create a dynamic within the team there. And it also, in addition to that, it helps you better understand how each of your team members view themselves within the context of your team. So let's go to the next slide, Lee, and we'll look at these in actual further detail. So here's the IDP there as it's swinging around. That's the individual development plan for each individual on a team. It's a bit more thorough. You can sort of see how it can be fleshed out with these questions and answers, and you can really start to build a relationship with the people who are on your team. That's a little bit into the deep end, and Lee loves to do this. It's probably not something that you'd want to do on day one, but if you're trying to build that rapport within your team, 5 languages of appreciation is one of my favorite. It's built off of Chapman's work that he did around the 5 languages of love, which I know there's no room for that sort of work in the professional workplace necessarily, but they pivoted it a few years later because they were getting so much traction out of the idea of how this looks in practice within a workplace under a different word than love, but appreciation. Like, how do you show the people who are working for you for their blood, sweat, and tears, in addition to their paycheck? Hopefully, they're working for more than their paycheck when it comes to working on your team, because that vision that you had, right? If you can get that figured out, then people work for you a lot more than for the check. If you want to see more on that, just watch Simon Sinek's talk on finding your why in the golden circle. I know we've all seen it 100 times if you've been in higher education for more than a day. But that 5 languages of appreciation is really important for being able to demonstrate that you care about the people who are working with you. And then the 34 strengths is another example across 4 domains from Clifton Strengths Finders work, and Tom Rath back in the late early 2000s is kind of when that went all into vogue. But we still use a lot of this work right now in order to better understand team dynamics within a team. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of those examples there as we keep moving forward here. And then finally, key resources. This is about developing partner networks, and this is going to be real quick because I want to get the ball back into Lee's court. So encouraging your team to develop connections, and encouraging yourself within your plan to consider how you're developing connections. And you can do this through conferences, societies, etc. You all are pros on this. This is just an example of how we have considered this. Next slide, Lee. And then finally, this is one of Lee's favorite ideas, is this idea of identifying and reaching out and sort of connecting with people and building that network. At the end of the day, this isn't just one of those fun human things. It's been academicified to the nth degree, and in context of academia, it is referred to, in context of human beings, it's referred to as social capital. And social capital, pound for pound, can at times be far more valuable than even capital. And these are the people who are in your social network that you can call upon. I always have a short list of people that if I ever get a chance to build a team of 10, I know exactly who I'm calling, and we're going to build that team, and we're going to be able to achieve that goal we're setting out for. And so this is sort of just planting that seed and starting to consider that in context of this framework. Lee, back to your
right. Give one more.
The revenue aspect. Yes, we talked about this in good detail earlier. I don't need to go into greater detail on that, but I do want to mention a handful of revenue streams, and you all are familiar with these things: grants, foundations, the department lab budget that you might get internal to the institution, any assistantships and students who carry those scholarships and assistantships with them, and all of the other way that your research projects can be funded externally. So just wanted to mention that. I talked about revenue streams a little bit earlier, but now we're back to the birds.
Yeah, this is last bird, promise. That big one on the left, or on the right is, common eagle today. The big one on the left is the biggest bird of prey that ever lived, the half eagle, also in New Zealand. So, it died out when its food source, like the baby versions of the giant moa, died out. now, of course, New Zealand has nothing dangerous. Just, we can bomb you with sheep, but there used to be this big bird of prey there. So we're going to finish on the deliver section. At the end of the day, what does the final product look like? What are we trying to put out there? What is the tangible aspect of what we are doing? And in this, there are two blocks within this domain: the solution and the channels blocks. And working through this, the whole Sciducio again, we've been through plan, which is akin to the background and objective section when you're writing a paper. We've done the manage section, which is the methods section, and now we're at deliver, which is akin to the results and conclusions section. In the solution section, we have research. So these, I should say, these are the different solutions, and there may be others that come up, but these are the different deliverables, the different products we are trying to generate, and some of these might be through our research. What difference, what impact do we want to have through our research? I think, and the most important one to me, is education. When a mentee has finished their tenure with you, what does that look like? What do you want them to achieve? Service, how are you contributing to the community and the field in general? And overall, what is the impact of all these activities? Like, through these solutions, what is the impact? Can you measure that impact? Like, how do you show that what you're doing is meaningful? And then there are different channels that we may use for these solutions. Of course, the obvious one in academia is publication, but where we publish is very important. We want to make sure it's somewhere impactful, that it's going to reach the target audience, and that we are writing for the target audience. We're not writing for other people in our immediate field. We're writing for the people that we want to impact. Practice. How does the work that we do influence the way other people do their research, or do things in the community, or deliver healthcare, or as Lane was talking about with the startup food enterprise, like how do we do those things, and in how are we contributing to the public in general? How are we ensuring wider impact of the things that we are doing? So let's go into a couple of examples. So looking at impact, again, our impact, we envision using our vision statement. So I said before, we had a mission statement that was comprised of 3 parts. So the first one of that was growth and personal development of mentees. What does that actually look like, and are we achieving that? What are our KPIs to show that we are doing that? And we can go through each component likewise. Public, often it's very easy just to think about our own little well, but not put what we're doing in the context of society. But the work that we do now more than ever can have greater reach, and arguably we need to be doing much more as academics to fight all the noise and the fake news that is around. So we need to use the tools and access individuals in the spaces in which they are, rather than, because they're not going to read manuscripts, they're not necessarily going to see a lot of what we are doing. But if we want the society, for us to have impact on society and let others know what we're doing, we need to use the tools that people are using. So we can do this through public speaking, social media activities, going to town halls. I mean, you're only essentially limited by your imagination. Here's a paper that one of my postdocs, Emma Cowley, wrote about how to use social media. Here she was focusing on how early career researchers can use this to extend their network and gain a greater footing within academia. But social media has many uses. Unfortunately, right now, a lot of it is noise, and we're just, our minds are being polluted. So I would say we use social media, though it should be planned. I can go back and rephrase Lane's quote about planning, but it's very important here too that that what we're putting out there is intentional. So I'm going to hand it over to Lane now. We're right at the end, and Lane's going to finish up.
Yes, and the only thing that stands between you all and us getting to actually talk about this a little bit, like we said at the beginning, the goal for this is a preliminary paper that's trying to codify a lot of the decisions and planning steps that could be useful when considering an academic research-based lab environment. We've also seen, and the paper that I'm working on is in context of how this might inform the development of a social venture based off the experience I had writing with Alice Ammerman from Chapel Hill and her team. There were a handful of people involved in that project, and I just saw so much relevance. And talking about it with them, it felt like they were like, "Wow, this would have been a really nice tool to at least consider what we were trying to embark upon before we started." And so, Lee, let's punch to the next slide here. As we started, we will finish. Academia requires many hats. We are not taught the intricacies of hat shopping necessarily through our respective PhD programs, unless you happen to be one of those blessed few who have a PhD in project management or something like this, and maybe you just weren't focused on bees or on the cardiovascular system, like Dr. Stoner focuses on exercise physiology and flow-mediated dilation systems. He's invented new things to sort of understand how people's hearts react to different stressors and things like that. If they're under high levels of non-communicable disease scenarios like obesity or that are contributing to the cardiovascular disease, et cetera, or if they're looking at elite athletes. Dr. Stoner's done a lot of work in that space. The point is, sometimes you don't understand the nuances of organizing people and teams. And if you're going to take your work to the next level and you want to scale this work to the greatest level of impact, we're always either going to wind up in a lab in those spaces within large teams, and presumably as a leader at some point leading them, right? If that's sort of your direction and your trajectory, which is really what this framework was initially focused on. So Lee, quick click here. And this is, I told you we would have a cheesy photo, and one more just for old time's sake, because one's never enough, right? This is us getting our hats organized. And this is kind of what Sciducio essentially attempts to do as a one-stop shop, to get you to stop and think about these things before you start, so that maybe you'll be more informed. Because again, as Eisenhower said, the plan is nothing, which is kind of disheartening. I start my business classes all the time, especially our new venture creation business planning class, where we're getting ready to embark on 16 weeks of high level, in-depth, 50, 60-page business plan with appendices, full pro formas. And I start saying the plan is nothing. We're literally embarking on wasting our time for the next 16 months if you just think the plan is the end all be all of what we're getting ready to do, because it's not. The point is that the plan is nothing, and the planning process that led to that is everything. Because when you make your first step and it's in the wrong direction, or maybe your second one, your first one's probably in the right direction, but your second or third is going to be in the wrong direction. The minute that happens, you will be able to sense that, and you'll know, and you'll be able to pivot much faster as an organization or as a team of people, because you have done the planning process. So you know what you're getting ready to embark upon. That's literally where the concept came through from Eisenhower, who was obviously a general at the time, managing large numbers of soldiers, and planning to execute certain types of activities in battle, and then having to pivot in real time. So that's just a quick key message there. We'll end with this next slide before we move into our discussion. This is a rehashing of what we presented at the beginning around the framework that we've offered. You now are far more familiar, hopefully, with the plan, manage, and deliver elements associated with this, and how these strategy, value, leadership, activities, resource finances, solution channels, blocks sort of play into it, and how you all might be able to start throwing your own post-it notes on here if you were to consider this in context of any of the lab work that you all are doing currently. So without further ado, we're at the 45-minute mark of our content presentation, and I want to make sure we have time for discussion. So poke holes. Ella, are you managing? It looks like Ryan has his hand
I
up.
saw a hand go up.
Yeah, Ryan has his hand up. Ella, are you? Are
Yeah,
we?
I think you should be able to. Yeah, everyone should be able to unmute themselves if you would like to talk.
No one's ever asked a question of me before in Teams, so I don't know how to handle this. So, Ryan, good to see you.
Hey, yeah, thanks for posting this on LinkedIn and whatnot. So power of social media, I guess. I'm came to this not managing a lab, but rather students who are doing kind of independent research projects, their own research. They're doing, going out in the field, doing this stuff, and from research methods, which we're kind of revamping that into the completed thesis stage. And so we're trying to figure out a way to maybe better organize and teach of like how to even conduct research. And so I'm wondering if you can, if this potentially could be some kind, because it seems more like, okay, a practical aspect to managing a thing that already exists, but more, I'm wondering if more like I'm a teacher of research methods. I teach students to do research. So would I be able to take, or could I take this to sort of plug different students in who are doing different things, but maybe like, oh, we all have to do IRB, we all have to do this, we all have to eventually get to these steps. Would something like that work in this framework? Or how, maybe I'm asking.
No, that's an awesome question, and that's an awesome application. Lee, do you want to jump in? Because I know you've done so much work with undergrad and graduate and postdoc. Like this is like your area.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, my lab group has included comprised of postdocs, PhDs, master's students, and undergrads and high school students, and research stuff. Yeah, and they all have different projects they're working on. They all have different needs, but they're all there to receive training. Like they are, to me, the most important deliverable from what I do. So that they are a product in and of themselves, right? And for them, I'm not interested in the project they're doing per se. I'm interested in them, and the project is a means to an end, right? So if you set, okay, the deliverable I want is for this student to be able to have the options to do ABC after they finish this degree, like that is the goal, right? Then everything else you set, including the project, is to help achieve that goal. So, but your KPI is, do they get the PhD position or the job or whatever it is after that they want? And just more generally for you, it seems like you may not have called it that, so make it more official, but it seems like you do have a mission and a vision, but because maybe you weren't using the parlance, which we don't in academia, right? This is stuff I've picked up over the last number of years, but just realize how helpful it is. But if you can use that, and then you can start to promote that mission and that vision, right? And then they're doing their individual projects, but they're trying to accomplish something great in what they are, right? The project is contributing towards something bigger, and I think you can do that by setting out your mission and vision, and then some of the other things you were saying, that are things that you need to manage, right? You're talking about administrative things and resources and so on. So I think all of that can go into there, and you don't have to use everything in there, and there is no one size fits all for doing any of this, and we've purposefully designed all of this to be descriptive rather than prescriptive, because there isn't one way to do anything, but you could use that, identify the tools that are going to work for you, and for you, I mean, you want your own KPIs to show you're being successful, right, for your promotions and so on. It will just help you put that into perspective and kind of document what you're actually doing. Did that help? Did that answer what?
Yeah, I have one more question just to kind of jump on that. So imagine I'm taking this and I'm bringing in students who they're starting their first year. And so the first semester, I'm like mapping out them moving along. Is there some sort of like timeline, like even like curriculum, hey, do this, then here's when you do this, here's when you do this? Or is it like, hey, everything needs to be set up before everyone comes in, and maybe you kind of decide at the beginning and then it moves on?
So what you're talking about there, I would include timelines for that individual within their individual development plan. There are many of like templates and frameworks around for that you can take and adjust to suit your need. But you can use that to say, okay, at the end of their degree, a successful student looks like this, right? And again, it's not just their project, right? But a successful student is good at communicating. They demonstrate analytical skills. They can give a good public talk. They can write. They are things that you want them to have, and so your individual development plan will lay out those key things that you want them to deliver, and you could use that then to develop a timeline. And that timeline, there will be like semi-static components, right? There'll be benchmarks at different stages as they go through their degree, but there'll be flexible aspects in there, because depending on who the student is and what you need them to accomplish, some of those goalposts will be changed. Because again, you don't want to use the same set of criteria for every student, right? Every person, everybody is different.
Ryan, you got me thinking, actually. I do a lot of work with undergraduate students doing undergraduate research. We know this is a high impact practice. It can help lead to higher levels of learning, retention, graduation rates, all the good stuff. It's been identified as a major contributor to student engagement, which is part of my background. But I'm sort of thinking about it. I'm like, okay, and it all might not be relevant, but if you sat down with them and you had a framework, like, I want you to just start with this with some Post-it notes, give them a stack of Post-it notes. And what's cool about this sounds super silly. This isn't printed out on an 8x10 piece of paper. This is printed out on like a large legal sheet of paper, if at all possible. The larger you can get it on a poster, the better. And students can just start like engaging with it a little bit. And so you get them to start with that problem area that they're looking to focus on. And I kind of mapped it out in some bullet points here. I didn't immediately jump to a way of leveraging the strategy block under planning domain in any practical way, unless maybe you could help them think about their bigger problem in terms of sub-research questions that would serve as like KPIs or objectives in context of a research study, for example. Those might serve as that. You're not talking about KPIs with research. You might be talking, unless you're talking about KPIs for a lab or something, and you're going to result in some high level goal. But thinking about this being reduced to you with an undergraduate student, trying to show them the research process. And then the leadership piece of it, maybe I struggled with that as well, but then I kind of came to life under the management section, where you have the different like extant literature that exists within the context of a literature review. The timeline piece comes in, what professional development that they need in order to be successful. Do they need to learn how to use in vivo if that's part of their analysis tool, or are you going to teach them how to margin code and expose them to naturalistic inquiry? And like, right, and you're setting up a prescription for that. Well, not a prescription, you're setting up a descriptive experience through the framework with them. I hadn't thought about it. So I'm kind of going off on a tangent right now, unfortunately, but I hadn't thought about sitting down, because we were thinking about this in a lab context, but I really like the idea of at least sitting down when you're talking to an undergraduate student with at least some tool or framework that can get them to think about it. And you might already be using something that does that. How do you do that currently? Do you see any relevance or alignment?
I mean, I think right now, and maybe it's kind of Lee's experience before you put this together, where you sort of say, oh, we do this, we kind of do that, but it's kind of a hodgepodge. It's like, oh, I do something like this in my class, but or like meeting with them one-on-one, kind of talking them through, but having something that is more kind of organized and a shell and kind of a framework might lead to more success, I guess, is what I was thinking.
Yeah, and I think, and you would have seen when Lane was talking about target audience, one of the big uses for this we see is for training.
Yeah, there it is. Yes.
Mentees, right? And I'm not sure what your students are going to go on to do. Like, are we talking graduate level students here or undergrad?
I teach, MA students, but they do a pretty intensive research project. They go to the field and collect data and this kind of stuff.
So many of these are going to go on to subsequent or further education after that, or the academic positions and or industry kind of research or leadership positions. And that's one of the goals that we had for this, to train students, like all the things that you wish you knew when you was being taught your PhD, which is we get taught a very small amount of what we actually need to know to be successful, right? No one tells us how to go about understanding all these different aspects. And I do want to point out, I've got I see Ryan Connors on here, and he wants to use some of this for a similar kind of thing. He's taken off over as department chair at, is it UAB Huntsville? Is that right, Ryan?
University of Alabama in Huntsville.
Yeah, I did get it right.
Yep.
And I do realise I forgot to send you back that application thing. We'll chat more. But because one of my favourite things to do is to mentor other faculty, and I've gone to different places to help set these kind of things up. And Ryan right now wants to build his program. Like he's come in and he's fresh-eyed and bushy-tailed and wants to improve things at UAB. So maybe Ryan, you can share a bit of what you want to accomplish, because it sounds like there's some good overlap.
Yeah, I was gonna chime in and say this in my talking with Lee. A few things come to mind as being a new department chair of just this semester, just finished up my first semester as being chairs. One, in speaking with Lee, it's helpful, I think, in terms of the idea of talk of research and external funding dollars and building that framework. Like was mentioned earlier, we are a much smaller, Division II university compared to, University of Alabama Tuscaloosa or University of Alabama Birmingham, but we have great faculty, resources, and students here. So when I look at it, once again, and speaking with him, it's how can we stand out for the things that we're good at and not try to fight against, UNC or other schools that, we just don't have the framework or the resources to be able to be competitive there. But we have a lot of things and opportunities, whether it's with special populations, special types of equipment, or things that are predominantly more down here, for instance, in kind of rural Alabama. So that's been one area that for me is helpful.
And also unfair advantage you're talking about, Ryan.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. That we just have access to some of that some of the larger schools may not. So we can tap into that network and then be, once again, a little bit more, have a higher opportunity of maybe getting some of those external funding dollars. And then from being a new chair, that's some of the information that I can share with newer faculty, because once again, we're not only trying to build the number of undergraduate students that we have, but also continuously building good quality faculty within our program. So a lot of the things that you guys said today that I was writing down is, once again, is how can I use some of this framework to help inspire and also build, younger assistant professors as they're moving towards tenure, and just once again trying to build out not only great students but also great faculty and build that kind of camaraderie. Because once again, as Lee just kind of mentioned, he's inspired me of his work of mentorship and how he's pulled in people from different areas and at different levels towards a common goal. So I'm kind of trying to use some of that here at UAH.
That's a really interesting additional framework. I live with a department head randomly. My wife 2 years ago stepped up to be department head of a department with 50 faculty members in it. And it's one of those weird conglomeration departments that are kind of, they're called human services, but they have everything from like parks and recreation to leadership to doctors of education in community college and in K through 12 and in higher education, all the way to counseling, and just so many different programs in there. And it's interesting when I'm looking at this through that lens of like how she's come in and she's been very adamant about trying to build a culture and trying to find where the overlap in the values across all those different programs are. And so a tool even like this, I think, could be used anytime you're really trying to manage a group of people and getting them to turn into the right direction with the right attitude. Planning and sort of charting out what that mission and vision, particularly that plan domain across the top, is critical to get right. And then you can have something to manage, right? If you have it's worth managing. You need a vision or a plan worth managing. And unfortunately, a lot of times we don't have a vision worth managing, unfortunately.
If nothing else, you can only ask for help if you can describe what you need help with. And like using these kind of things that we've incorporated in the framework gives you some of that language and helps you identify, like what Lane was saying about earlier on, he helped me realize, oh, no, Lee, what you're doing is called a thing. There's a thing, right? And it got me better at explaining it, and then kind of leveraging other people's experience within different areas of academia, and then further building upon that. But if you can't explain it, you can't develop it, right? You can't ask for help. So just knowing some of those things at a basic level. And then with the plan, Lane mentioned we've got a Jamboard version. What you can start to do is, I won't make it bigger than it needs to be. Just start maybe with it all on a big screen. You can print it out and big if you want, but I encourage to save the environment and have it on a big screen or on your own laptops, because everyone can join into the Jamboard. And then you can go through each of the boxes and just don't think about it too much. Just ask them to put a sticky note on it. Like there's a function on there, and we describe how to do this on the website. But just write down, okay, for the vision, I think we want to achieve this, and start to just map some of those things out, and it can be very iterative.
I think another thing for me, which is interesting, utilizing the framework and kind of along with what Ryan was saying. So I teach a lot of undergraduate research. And one of the things that we've been continuously trying to do here, and I'm guessing, a lot of universities and colleges are trying to do is to continue to build that sense of community within our students. So that's another thing that in looking at this framework and the things you guys have talked about planning and setting out those goals and what are some of those strategies that you can use, what we've been trying to do is utilize undergraduate student research to help develop that sense of community, and within those students as being working on similar research topics, and as they go through the IRB process and data collection, but they feel like not that they're just commuter students to the university, but they do have that sense of community within one another. And then once again, to help to get more of engaged alumni, if we can build that sense of community now while they're here, then hopefully we'll have better alumni engagement moving forward. So kind of using it in that sense.
I think that's an excellent example, Brian. So you've got all these different students doing these different things, but they know they're working towards something bigger. You've presented them with a vision, right? So what they're doing is impactful. Like the sum of the parts is always greater than the individual parts, right? So, and if they're all working towards something as a whole, then it also increases the likelihood that your faculty members can now get funding because they're generating pilot work, etc., or showing that they're thinking outside the box a bit and showing that they can recruit those populations that they need to for their work. I mean, there's many ways to skin a cat, right? And you can be very creative in terms of how you use all these things.
Agreed.
Well, I think we've got a couple of minutes left if we have any other questions. Or if Lee wants to tell us more about unbelievably dangerous New Zealand and Australian birds.
There are no dangerous animals in New Zealand. There aren't any, there's no land mammals either. Not that are native to New Zealand.
Awesome. Well, Ella, do you sort of create the denouement here, or do we do that, or Demano?
So, what in terms of sharing everything and tying up?
Yeah, tying out, closing us down here.
Yeah, of course. No,
Otherwise, I
I'm
think
happy,
we all
happy
might.
to do that. No, so I wasn't sure if you guys wanted to say anything to finalize, but no, I'm very happy to as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's great. Yeah, the only other comment I want to make is to make sure everybody knows that this is something that we've put out there a few months ago, and we are trying to see if anybody else might be interested in contributing to what we have set up as a special issue with Frontiers. And we're trying to generate, 3 to 5 more additional articles in this space that are either thinking about its application in a department head role, or thinking about this application or relevance in undergraduate research or honors-based projects, or just seeking to torpedo the whole thing one systematic step at a time, which I don't know if that would be worth anyone's time necessarily. But the point is to try to create some dialogue and energy around this and see if it actually might be able to help transform the way some of our top academic minds are thinking about how they manage their labs and teams.
Thank you very much, Lane. Liam, is there anything you're on that you'd like to add before tying up?
No, just thanks for folks for joining in, and hopefully even more get to watch it. And yeah, we can share resources, and we are very happy to answer emails and help further. Like, as you can tell, Lane and I are just passionate about these things, so happy to help.
Very much so.
Thanks, Lee. But yes, as I said at the beginning, this recording will go out to everyone, both here and everyone who registered who wasn't able to join. And yeah, in terms of questions, thank you very much, Lee and Lane, for being open. And also, if anyone has any kind of technical questions about contributing to the collection, kind of about the journal, anything like that, you're also very welcome to get in contact with myself and Damiano, kind of representing the journal here. And we're very happy to help as well. So. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone, again for joining. It was lovely to hear and see you. And yes, yeah, good afternoon, morning, evening again. I think mostly morning for you guys.
Right. It must be your bedtime there, so
yeah, almost. But no, thanks, guys.
For us.
Everyone, good to see y'all.
Bye.
Thank you.